I would like to believe that if aliens really took over the earth, that I would become a fearless resistance fighter. I'd be living underground. I'd be stealing alien technology. But most of all, I'd be making those inspirational speeches right before the dangerous missions. But I really don't know. I've got no army training. I'm not good with camping. I really do like indoor plumbing and air conditioning. So honestly, I think it could be really tough for me to survive one of those invasions. But Brent, I don't know. Have you given any thought to how you would get through an alien invasion?
I've thought about this a lot, actually.
Oh, good.
Yeah. And so I have exactly the same amount of skills that you do done in terms of surviving. If you think about it, there seems to be 3 different lanes you can pick. There's I'm going to roll over and assimilate and just be a good soldier. I'm going to join a resistance and fight and try and bring down the alien overlords. Or I'm going to be a double agent. I'm going to be a collaborator. I'm going to pretend to be, yeah. And so even though I have qualms about the moral and ethical gray area of that, if you will, it sounds more exciting. So I think I would go with collaborator.
It's completely defensible for you because no matter who you're talking to, you get to say, I'm actually on your side.
Yes.
I've only been pretending to do the other. That's really smart.
Yeah.
What you don't want to become is an enthusiastic collaborator. But I'm afraid that if I was collaborating, I'd be one of those reluctant middle management collaborators, the guys that has reservations, but just trying to make things work out. That's my nightmare scenario. I like yours. I'm going to go with double agent from now on. But this whole thing, this episode, Life After Contact, has been really fun because to try to imagine what actually might happen, because we've done a lot where we're talking about, are there movies that actually reflect something that's really going on right now? But clearly, if we're going to do a show about life after contact, where contact has occurred in some result and they're here with us on Earth right now, I may believe they're here on Earth right now, some of them, but I don't actually see evidence that we are having the boot of aliens on us on a daily basis. And so really the question we're answering today is, once the ships stop arriving and these aliens settle in, there's a lot of different ways to go. Yeah. And I hadn't actually thought of this until we started looking into all these movies. We've got a bunch of them today. Freedom Fighter and Collaborator, obviously the big choices. Yeah. But we found places where there's refugees, and certainly there's bureaucrats out there and neighbors and even romantic partners in a few of them, which is very odd and strange. But mostly, I think a lot of people would just turn out to be the guy that's trying to keep his lights on without getting vaporized.
That tends to be the most common storyline. Although I do notice that most of the time Hollywood casts the heroes as rebels. The people that you're usually following in these stories, if there is some sort of resistance or rebellion, those are the characters you'll be following.
Right.
Which I think makes sense from a dramatic standpoint. That's the toughest character arc. You're against all odds. You're just one guy. You're part of a resistance. At any time you could get caught and probably killed. Yeah. And it's a David versus Goliath story. So what's not to love?
I've been on a film festival of post-contact interaction. And the one thing that kind of struck me after watching all these things is, if you think about it, first contact is like an event. That's something that happens at some point in these movies, or even in the backstory of the movie. A bunch of ships come, and quite often a specific number of them, which is very interesting as well. But if first contact's an event, coexistence is a political system. And I find that very interesting, because as we look through the films we're going to be talking about today, and the TV series, in fact, TV series are quite prominent in this world. It's how they are trying to organize themselves after this clash of cultures that we were talking about in our previous episode. I found it fascinating. And it actually, one began to inform the other. I would watch, we'll get to all this later, but you watch Alien Nation, which comes from the 80s, and then you get to watch District 9 from the 2000s, and they seem to have evolved in their own way.
Yeah, I have to say that when we were preparing for this, and I'd seen a lot of this content before, but I went back and refreshed myself on several of the things. First of all, the sheer volume of times this story has been told, the life after contact, surprised me. I knew it had been told a couple of times. We have talked about this just in our personal lives before, but I also was starting to get all of the details blurred together. When I was trying to keep track of one movie versus a TV show. Okay, wait, so this one was the resistance called this, but then this one it was called this, and this one they were successful, and this one they weren't. And forgive me if I get a bunch of stuff mixed out. I think I've got it straight, but there's a lot of plates to spin.
There are plates spinning. Listen, I'm just going to give people some things to think about as we go into our first break here. One of the reasons that this is a popular thing is that it allows writers to comment on humans by virtue of the mirror of the aliens. Mm-hmm. So a great example of that, of course, would be District 9, which talks about apartheid, and Alien Nation, which I mentioned, talks about immigration.
Yep.
They're both the same coin, but they're the different sides of it. And then V, of course, was talking about fascism, and Colony, which we'll talk about, the TV series, that's really talking about occupation. It's like the French resistance thing. And the film that we probably both just saw was Captive State, which is that colonial exploitation. And then, of course, the big one that's hot right now is the conformity of Pluribus. So a lot of things for us to talk about. We're just getting started. So stay with us. We'll talk about it on the other side of this.
I'm Brent Friedman. Years ago, a family friend who became a cabinet member in the Reagan administration disclosed to me that aliens are real, they're here, and he'd seen them.
I'm Bryce Zabel. Later, when we were producing Dark Skies, an NBC TV series about an alien invasion, we were approached by men who said they were from the Office of Naval Intelligence, and they wanted to give us inside information in exchange for access to our show.
We didn't take that deal, but we have never stopped thinking about it.
That's why we do this podcast. We're working out ideas in real time about how Hollywood has portrayed aliens and why.
Every episode is different because there are so many questions.
We're looking for answers. It's an active investigation. Let's do this together.
So, before we jump into our slate of movies and series today, I just want to mention that we have already talked about movies that are based on life after contact. They were a little bit more hostile. We talked about Independence Day. We talked about Mars Attacks. And later, we're going to be talking about movies that are a little more subversive, like Invasion of the Body Snatchers or They Live, where contact hasn't really happened, but the invasion has begun. So there's a lot of different wrinkles on this. But I think right now, let's jump into our first TV series. It was from Apple. It was a series called Invasion, and it's basically about an alien attack on Earth. That's going to be a common refrain, but from the perspectives of ordinary citizens that are scattered across multiple continents. And all of these distinct characters are really trying to make sense of what's happened and survive in the chaos. You've got, I'm not going to get into all the characters' names, by the way, because I think, Bryce, you can agree. If we think about all the characters' names we're going to mention in this show, it would be overwhelming. So we've got a mother who's discovered a powerful alien artifact, and she's dealing with her husband's infidelity. We've got a comm specialist who's grieving the loss of her astronaut lover while investigating the extraterrestrial signal. And so you can see a theme coming up here. We've got a Navy SEAL whose squad is ambushed by the invaders and killed, leaving him to fight to try and return to his family. And then finally, a British schoolboy who begins experiencing terrifying visions and develops a mysterious psychic connection to the alien hive mind. So this is really a story where everyone has a personal problem or backstory or baggage that they're trying to work through while they're also trying to make sense with the alien storyline.
As you mentioned, it's Apple TV that has this. And I know they've done 3 seasons. I've seen every episode. A good friend of mine, director Sylvan White, has directed multiple episodes. It's got a great pedigree. No issue about that. I'll just admit something that most people who have seen it would say anyway, and that the critics have said. The first season seemed incredibly slow to people. It just took forever to get places to the average person. I was willing to cut it a lot of slack because I really felt, obviously, people have dropped a lot of money on this thing. And people have spent a lot of time thinking about it. The execution is beautiful. And it's interesting to me because with season 2 and with season 3, with each one, the alien invasion part gets a little more authentic and real. The aliens are more front and center. And it felt to me like somebody in the executive offices had a note saying, come on, let's get to it, folks. Yeah. I do think it is interesting, though. It's probably the thinking man's invasion piece. It's not for the popcorn crowd, like, say, V might be or something like that. It's got big thoughts and big ideas it wants to lay out there. And there's nothing simple about it. Now, it is interesting, as many of these things do, Brent, this one has a hive mind at work. Yeah. Brent and I are not claiming, folks, that we have invented hive minds for aliens or anything, but we did have a hive mind. We actually called it the Hive in Dark Skies in our 90s show. And it seems like everybody's calling it the Hive these days. That must be the thing. It's a hive in Pluribus, which we'll get to later. A lot of hiving going on out there. Why do you suppose that is? Why is that so attractive to everybody?
That's a great question. If I'm being honest, it's probably when they sat down to make Invasion, they said, what has been done recently? And what feels fresh? No one's really done a hive mind recently. Let's do that. Because I think it's hard, as we're going to see when we go through these projects, that it's hard to do something unique. The story has been told so many times. This is a story that, as you're going to see, has a human resistance that organizes against the aliens. The aliens are here to terraform and reshape the earth for themselves, another common theme. And so I think what I got the sense was their whole thing was, let's change the perspective. Let's make that unique. Let's have it be 4 different stories across the globe. So you're really experiencing this from 4 unique points of view. And how do all these characters relate and what's going to happen? And so I think it was more the structural narrative that they came up with that is unique, because a lot of the elements are things you've heard and seen before.
I have not specific to Invasion, which again is a series I've come to like more as I watch more of it. Yep. Not a put down, just saying it rewards you kind of sticking with it a little bit. But I have a theory about the hive mind thing. I mentioned earlier how a lot of these sort of post-contact things give writers like ourselves a chance to comment on humanity through the eyes and the mirror of the aliens. I think the Hive is exactly what that's about. And I think it applies to why we even did the Hive, which is, if there's an alien hive mind, what does that do? First of all, for us, it showed off the communist thing we were doing the 1960s during the middle of the Cold War. Well, and a lot of American military planners saw the Soviets as they're just a hive. They think as one, they act as one. Yep. The other thing, though, is that if you have an enemy, if you will, of aliens that have a hive mind, what that does is it shows what we have that makes us different and in some cases wonderful, which is we may think a lot of weird things and we may not be perfect, but we think for ourselves.
Yes.
Now that may be one of our faults. And to an alien, they may say the problem with these humans is they can't get their act together because they all think differently.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
I think so. I think that's kind of how I would go with that. And not that there's as they say, not that there's anything wrong with that. It's a good show.
Yep.
Now, by the way, though, let's move on from Invasion, give it the light touch there, because again, the problem with certain shows is you and I may think to ourselves, wow, it's on Apple. So, wow, everybody's watching it. The truth is, Apple, while a very great platform, doesn't have that many people watching it. Most people don't buy Apple and watch it. So a lot of people that are listening to this are going, now what's it called? It's called Invasion again. That sounds a little generic or whatever. And in contrast, for example, another one where the invasion is happening now and humans are fighting against it is Falling Skies.
Yes.
Now, Falling Skies is something that I believe it was on TNT, but a lot of people saw it. It came from Steven Spielberg. And it had Noah Wyle, as you said earlier, bravely standing up for the resistance. And he was a school teacher who picked up a gun and said, my job is I got to fight off this alien attack. And before we get into the show, I will just say I had a really great moment last year on the red carpet at the Emmys, because I saw Noah Wyle, who went on to win his first Emmy, I think, as Best Actor for The Pit. And I don't think too many people last year were reminding him about how much they enjoyed watching him in Falling Skies fighting aliens. But that's something I got to do. And I think he did years of that show and he was great at it. And in fact, it goes to show that sometimes a series can really be elevated just by having one really incredible quality actor who holds it all together. And he certainly did with that. But the concept of it, though, I'll leave to you. Tell people what this is all about.
This is an alien race called the Espheni, I believe.
Yes, I think you got that.
Invaded Earth to extract resources, enslave humanity, and basically create a frontline military units because they are actually, and this is an interesting twist, they're trying to secure a strategic stronghold for an ongoing intergalactic war that they are entangled in. So using Earth as a staging ground is an interesting new take. So, of course, there is a resistance movement, and it's basically a primary group of civilian and military survivors that we focus on in the Boston area. And it's led by a military captain, and I'll say played by Will Patton. And that resistance that's happening there is part of a larger growing resistance across the planet, we come to believe. And then what's interesting I found is that it wasn't a military fighting back. It was much more ground warfare. It was guerrilla warfare on the part of the humans, fighting pretty much overpowered aliens, stealing their technology when they could to try and level up. It was a fun series. It felt a lot more action oriented, certainly than Invasion. It seemed like it was geared towards, frankly, a different audience.
It was fun. I remember thinking to myself, I don't really need to see every episode, and yet I did. Because I would go, oh, Falling Skies is on. I think I'll watch that because I had it on the DVR and it would, I think I'll watch Falling Skies because it just felt comfortable. It was broadcast television. It was comfortable to watch. And because it had the aliens in it, this is a show that is not about coexistence. We are going to get into the coexistence model, but this ain't it. This is the one where humanity is allowed to remain on their own planet simply as raw material, whether it be labor or biological inventory. The aliens do not want to negotiate with us. That's the only thing I could say. They're not here to have a conversation. They're not here to make a deal, as Trump is trying to do with the Iranians. No deals are on the table with these people. And their model of conquest has a lot of different aspects to it. And I hope this never happens to the Earth, to be honest with you, because it's the same model as Independence Day, which is overwhelming military lack of symmetry. It's just, it's an asymmetrical thing. It's like for us to do it, we are the scrappy guys because they got us beat technologically. But the other thing they do is they destroy our human institutions. It isn't just that they want to defeat us. They don't want us being human anymore.
Correct.
Okay. Which I think is really scary. Biological control. They're taking some of these, usually kids, and they're turning them into slave laborers by attaching some weird alien thing to their back, which I can't remember the name of, but that means child conscription, which is not a good thing. But the defining thing about it is the guerrilla resistance. Now, I have to say, probably if the Earth is ever unlucky enough to be trashed by an alien species that comes here bent on domination, probably plucky guerrilla warfare isn't going to win the day for us. Probably not.
Right. Yeah. It makes for a good TV series, but in terms of being realistic or believable, hard to imagine. As you pointed out, it's not just that they are technologically superior to us. It's that they have no morality whatsoever. They are conscripting kids. They're using kids as human shields in some cases. The kids are being turned into these mutants that are called skidders. It's pretty dark and it's pretty grim. And if they're willing to do all of that, like how do we combat that? It's intense.
It isn't just us against them. It's not like humans here, aliens here, fight. It's more complex. And to my mind, that, if anything, is this card being laid down that defines what might be happening here on Earth right now. Because a lot of people in UFO circles who are major sources say it ain't just one. And in fact, they're talking 4 and 5 different species. One of the things that I found very interesting about Falling Skies is the Espheni. Is that what? That's the bad guys, or
yes.
there's a group of good guys who show up to help, and that's interesting because I thought it did mirror what we did in Dark Skies. We basically said we thought that we were at war with the Greys, but it turned out that the thing that was inside the human head that was being taken over was also inside a gray head, and that the Greys were a species that had been sublimated. So they also wanted to fight the hive.
Right.
So maybe we'll get lucky if we ever get invaded, and maybe we'll have somebody on our team, which would be pretty wonderful.
Just one last thing to point out. We had a guest on just recently, Todd Masters, who did all of the alien effects for Falling Skies. So it was fun to go back and watch again his masterwork, as it were.
In fact, he started talking about the guys that came to help out. And I can't remember the name of the actor, but it's a tall English.
It's Doug Jones.
Doug Jones.
Playing Cochise or Cochise.
Cochise. And he's tall, and I must say, they let him speak in his own accent. So he's this other group that's here to help us sounds like the Brits have come. The British are coming. The British are coming. Only this time they're on our side. But yes, I do think it looked very good. It was a good looking show.
Why don't you take us into the next category, which is going to be the occupation, collaboration, resistance, that we're not in a hot war anymore.
Right. Here's the post-contact thing. And there are three things that we highlighted here. One of them is V, which I think we should talk about first, because what's interesting about V is it really has had a life. V tells the story. It's a franchise, by the way, no question. And in its original form, it came out in the 80s as a miniseries, and it just took the viewing population by storm. And I remember watching it, and there is a shocking moment in it. And again, I just can't imagine we can spoil a 1980s miniseries that everyone's been talking about for decades. But the shocking thing at the time, though, is that these visitors show up, they arrive. And by the way, I said that there were specific numbers of saucers. There's 50 of them that show up over the Earth cities. And they basically do the "we come in peace" thing.
Yes.
It's the sleight of hand that the to serve mankind aliens did in the Twilight Zone. And they're there to help. We need certain things from you. We need some resources, but we want to give you some things too. And they have the hot woman leader. And, but then I believe it was at the end of the thing, or sometime in it, at the end of one episode, I just remember the reporter figure sneaks on the mothership. And he's watching these things, and they all look like us. It could be Nordics. They look like us, except he watches as one of them does this thing and peels off the human mask, and it's a freaking reptilian.
Yes. Yeah. That was a memorable moment for network television.
Damn, people like that. And of course, there was a resistance, and it led to a TV series. So there was an initial, I believe, I don't know which, I think the miniseries came first. Then there was a movie, then there was a TV series, and then there was a reboot in 2009. And the one thing I will say, and then drag you into this, is I did watch the original. And while I was enthralled by it, watching it in the 80s, if I watched it now, and I did watch a couple episodes before this, it didn't do it for me anymore. It was just like, we've advanced in our storytelling. The 2009 series, which went on for 2 years, that's pretty darn good. But again, the thing I thought was so funny is, okay, so first there were 50, and we talked about Arrival previously, there were 12. Craft. Yes. Okay, so they went from 50 in the 80s version. There's 29 ships. I don't know why there's only 29 ships, but they do have a hot female played by, I believe, Monica, whatever her last name is, who was one of the leads on Homefront or Homeland. Anyway, reboot didn't have the success culturally that the first one did, but it was a better viewing experience.
I agree. I mean, I think that context is everything. When V came out, there really hadn't been anything like that on network television that everyone had access to. And I think that, like you talk about that, the reveal of the reptilian alien was quite memorable, especially if you were younger. On that topic, something that it made me question, when was when did reptilians come into the discussion of ufology? And I went back and I honestly couldn't find anything before V. And in fact, the most, I will say, durable references that have started the conversations and put it in pop culture came from the British conspiracy theorist David Icke in his book, The Biggest Secret, the book that will change the world. And many of the ideas in there are from V. And so we're back to this whole thing of, is it time to introduce the chicken to the egg? Because what came first? The idea that V put forward of reptilian aliens born out of a Hollywood production, or David Icke's research that may have had nothing to do with V. Maybe he never saw it and he uncovered something that he decided to write this book. It's a fascinating topic to look at what created the idea of reptilian aliens.
We need to update the phrasing. It's which came first, the reptilian or the egg? Because
there you go.
I do believe these reptilians have eggs. It is quite fascinating. That is a great point. I'm really glad you unearthed that, because that is the essence of the question that keeps popping up in Sound, Light, and Frequency.
Yep.
Are writers who are attuned to the zeitgeist and all this trolling for good ideas saying, okay, they're talking about this in the UFO world, and since nobody believes in UFOs officially, this will be a great topic for me to write about.
Yeah.
And then people see this, some people then see it on TV, and then the theory would go, they begin to incorporate it into their own worldview.
Right.
That has limitations, but on the other hand, there are moments where you can find some examples of it. The one thing I would just like to say, because I think it, in the same way that reptilians coming to fore is also part of this, the evolution we've had as a society. The 80s version of V, really, if you think about it, is asking how ordinary people will respond when fascism comes to town, because that's what, and it's disguised as friendship. These V's, the V's, which stands for visitors in the initial one, and I don't think they use that in the second one, but they come and say, hey, we're just your friends. But then they do all these fascist things.
Yes.
And one of the things that they do is they cast doubt on scientists. They start to undermine institutions, which I thought was very interesting. Don't trust the scientists. Those scientists will do you wrong, which very fascinating, because there's some of that going on today.
Yeah.
The remake, though, really asks what happens. Here's the difference. In the 80s version, they come to town in the show. That's when they show up on Earth. But in the later version, they've been here for a good long time.
Yes.
And they have just been getting ready to put the plan into motion. So the remake is really asking what happens when these conquerors have already infiltrated our institutions. Yeah. And they've already mastered our media. And they've already manipulated our children.
You're talking about an alien sleeper cell, essentially.
Yes.
That's here on Earth.
Only a planet-wide global alien sleeper cell. And to be quite honest, the reason we do this isn't just to talk about TV shows that we like and things like that. It's also to ask the question, is there a reference point in what we're going through and what's out there in ufology right now? And it would literally be that. Even Spielberg's latest movie, Disclosure Day, is talking about how there are hybrids out there walking among us.
Yeah.
And clearly, David Jacobs, who has been one of the leading researchers into the abduction phenomenon, says, oh, they're here. He calls them hybrids, human hybrids.
Love that term.
I think that the latest one from 2009 probably was trying to make some points. And clearly, the people who were behind it were well read on ufology.
Yeah, you're right. That brings us to Captive State.
Oh, yeah.
So the aliens again in Captive State, which is a TV series. I'm trying to remember. No, I'm sorry. It's a Captive State. Yeah. See, I said this was going to happen. They were all going to blur together, and here we go. Captive State is a movie, and it is a movie where the aliens come to Earth to exploit the planet's natural resources and terraform the environment. for their own survival, forcing humanity into a subsequent global surveillance state. So they're adding the whole technological wrinkle here. Interestingly, this film did not explain how the aliens came to Earth or where they came from. It begins, as we say in storytelling, in media res, like during the invasion, focusing entirely on the aftermath, the global capitulation and the subjugation of humanity by what's called the legislators.
That was an odd phrase for aliens.
Very interesting. Anyway, the whole thing's set in Chicago, and we begin a decade after this extraterrestrial force has conquered Earth. So there's your setup.
Okay, here's a couple of things. They had high hopes for this one. It cost $25 million to make this thing. They shot it all in Chicago, though, so it does have a nice look to it. It is gritty Chicago. It only made $8 million, so it's a bomb. Mm-hmm. So we're not telling everyone you need to go watch it because it's important in film class. But it is interesting, though. You don't see the aliens much in this thing. Mm-hmm. This is not about watching them run rampant throughout the city. This is a place where Chicago has already been conquered 9 years earlier, and it's drafted humans to help build them these deep underground locations where they live. And the people that are out, the humans up there, are in charge of the other humans. And then some of the lucky humans report to the aliens themselves. I can see quite clearly why it wasn't as popular. It's hard to get your head around it. I had to watch it twice to understand the ending, even though now that I do understand the ending, and I'm not going to even spoil this ending.
No,
somebody might want to watch it, but it was hard to get my head around, and it's not that satisfying. It is, however, something with a nice genealogy. The director and co-writer was Rupert Wyatt, who among his credits is one of the early Planet of the Apes, and maybe others. So it's well done, but people didn't like it. They just didn't like it. And maybe because people who watch alien movies expect more aliens in them.
I was going to say, I think that was what was most notable was they actually had an interesting alien design. It was unique. It was porcupine-like is really the best way to describe it. But by and large, as you said, they lived underground. They were a subterranean race, and they were rarely on screen. If I'm going to be at war with aliens, I kind of want to see the enemy. Yep. And they didn't deliver that. And at the end of the day, and when we start looking at across all of these different stories, you got to bring the alien.
I will say one thing that makes it different and stand out, and for me made it worth watching. It treats the act of rebellion differently than most other films and TV series like this, in that it says rebellion is a matter of patient infrastructure.
Yes.
Where the people who are rebelling are patient. They are planning. They're willing to sacrifice in order to get to what they need. They're not just out there angrily shooting a few rounds and getting vaporized. This is a bureaucratic response that actually may be more effective than the falling skies response.
Yes, agreed. It's one is militia versus terror cell, because I hate to glorify terror cells, but I think that approach, like you said, the patience, working surreptitiously, having long-term strategic goals rather than just rushing out and fighting and being brave and taking a bullet. Okay, that's one way to do it. But that part of the movie I thought was interesting, how they approached the resistance. Because again, at this point, you keep seeing this idea that there's always a human resistance. So how is this story going to do it differently?
Moving on, there's a TV version of Captive State that way more people saw, as tends to be the case, other than for the big, huge films. And it's Colony. And if indeed Captive State, the film, is this 2-hour slice where it's about the structure of power organizing in the shadows to try to take down the alien overlords, Colony uses the same setup, but to tell stories. I guess the way I would say it is it wants to tell stories about characters.
Yeah.
And that's what television is most successful at. And I believe the lead character is Josh Holloway from Lost, who everybody loved him in Lost. And I love him in general. I just think he's a really interesting character. And it's his family. So it's really the story of one family. And it's also a story about how deceit isn't just something that's institutional in terms of trying to fight this, but within his own family, it's corrosive. Yes. He gets drafted to try to stop the insurgency. And it looks like his wife is going along with that, but his wife is part of the insurgency.
Yeah. That was a nice wrinkle. That's an interesting way again to say, okay, how can we do a resistance or an insurgency, but make it feel fresh? Have your family divided and one on each side of the fence. I thought that was a nice twist.
It was terrific. I talked about Josh Holloway. I just have to say, sometimes I just like to talk about the actors because I'm a writer-producer and I like to do that. There is a character called Proxy, I believe Proxy Snyder. Now, Proxy Snyder is played by an actor, Peter Jacobson. And Proxy Snyder is the head of not the resistance. He's the guy who's basically between the aliens and the population.
Yes.
And they play him as such a pragmatist. He's like, what do you want me to do? He's almost aggressive in his compromise. And it's such an incredible performance by Jacobson. And for people who don't know him, he was in House. He was in Ray Donovan. He was in The Americans. But in this one, Proxy Snyder is almost exactly what you would think would happen. This thing takes place in Los Angeles. And if you're the aliens and you want to hide behind these giant walls they build, then you're going to need some humans, unless you're going to kill every human. And various reasons, they don't want to kill every human yet. You're going to need humans to clean up their own mess. And that's where Proxy Snyder comes in. It's a great performance. I would advise seeing Colony just for that. And there's some wonderful little moments because, again, his pragmatism. Holloway's character is Will Bowman. And he says to Snyder at one point, he goes, "You've met them? What are they like?" Because there's this interest in because the aliens have not presented themselves.
Yep.
They're in the shadows or on the other side of the wall. And Proxy Snyder says, it is a humbling moment, realizing how insignificant we all are in the universe. Wow. So that's why he's been able to rationalize, I don't really have to stand up for humanity.
Right. Yeah.
That much, because we're all insignificant. I'm just helping everybody get by. And I do think that's fascinating because I don't know if aliens rationalize. I haven't had any experience with them. I haven't read any white papers on them or anything, but I do know humans like to rationalize. I remember watching it with Jackie, my wife, and I was interested because I'm all in on alien stuff, even stuff that you and I or some of the people listening may say, that's just bad. And I'm thinking maybe, but I enjoyed watching it because I like to see the choices others make.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've made choices like that. And it's hard to make all perfect choices. So I really enjoy seeing how it's done. But for her, she got through season 1 and she's like, I don't need to see this anymore.
Just a couple things to add here. I thought it was interesting that we talked about Falling Skies and the fact that those aliens, was it the Espheni?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
The Espheni.
That's going to roll off your tongue like nobody's business by the time we get done here.
The Espheni.
Espheni.
One of the things they were here on Earth for was to build up their defenses because they were part of a cosmic war that they were being dragged into. That was similar with these aliens. They were here because they were part of a cosmic war and they were going to be in battle with someone. The most interesting thing, though, I thought about the show, which was their unique twist, is that apparently prior to their arrival, there was a global conspiracy of wealthy and powerful human leaders who made a deal with the hosts, with the aliens.
Yes.
And so this wasn't a sleeper cell. That's very different. This is, we're going to come in and we're going to cut deals with the people in charge, get them on our side so that they can take care of themselves and they'll sell out humanity. Yeah. And so that's when I think of a very subversive type of alien invasion that really says more about the humans than it does the aliens. I think Colony wins the day there.
Yeah. But into my favorite two ideas, they're both movies because they're different. And it isn't the alien overlords come in and lord it over us puny humans. It reverses it. And they're fascinating. The movies we're talking about, of course, are Alien Nation and also District 9. Now, we almost have the same time frame. Alien Nation is 80s and District 9 is the 2000s. Yep. So the same evolution. And again, I've evolved with it myself because Alien Nation was a film first. James Caan was, and Mandy Patinkin.
Great cast.
Playing the alien. That was their movie. And then it became a TV series. And it also became a series of movies of the week and things like that. The premise is very simple. It's set in the near future, which, by the way, back then was 1991 Los Angeles.
I know.
So the near future was 1991. Okay. Yes, I'm old. Okay. And a human police detective is partnered with an alien detective.
Yes.
Okay. That's the premise. But the uber premise is interesting. Out in the desert outside of Los Angeles, this giant craft has crashed, and it's a slave ship full of these, they call them the newcomers. Mm-hmm. So you don't have to learn Espheni or
Espheni. Yeah.
Yeah. You don't have to learn that because everybody can say newcomers. So the newcomers are out there in the desert and they get integrated. They learn English and they're humanoid and they just have funny, weird heads with mottled stuff on them, but they get integrated into Los Angeles society. And they have all the same problems humans have, and humans look at them with the same condescension we look at other racial groups and things. Yep. So again, it's a commentary on us. But here's the thing. Loved it in the 80s. Watched it again for this show. Just didn't make it for me as a film, even though the concept is pretty cool.
Yeah, I agree. When I saw it at the time, it felt interesting and fresh, that idea of the assimilation. And it's really a story about the immigrant struggle, being the outsider, trying to fit in. What's funny is the main thing that if you said, do you remember Alien Nation? Before I rewatched it for the podcast, I would have said, oh, is that the movie where the aliens get drunk on curdled milk? That was like the big detail for me that stuck out, that I couldn't tell you anything about the plot until I had rewatched it. I knew it was something about a buddy cop thing, but that idea, the idea that aliens would come here and take something that is so vile to humans, and it actually is like an intoxicant. And I loved that idea.
It makes James Caan, the other cop, just revolted. He just
exactly.
Stand
it made me revolted
idea.
too. Yeah.
Yeah, boy, curdled milk. It is interesting though. So, by the way, something can succeed in concept and get dated in execution. So, in other words, if somebody remade Alien Nation right now, I'm sure it'd be quite good, and I'd be compelled by it because it would be made with new actors and new ways of telling it and everything. But this was unique for its time, I believe, because the aliens are not an invading army. They're us, basically. Right. They're everything you could think of, particularly in the TV series. They are neighbors. They're colleagues. They're defendants. They're voters. They're spouses. They're children. They move into homes across the street from you. They managed to say a lot about human society because when I believe it's the pilot for the TV series, and an alien family is moving in across the street. Yes. And it's like the first black family moving in the 60s or something. And there's just a lot of conflict. And so it really does give the writers a chance to talk about things that are racist policing, things like that. But is it saying anything about where we actually are UFO-wise? I'm not sure. I do know it's always bothered me about the size of these reported craft that are up there.
Yeah.
Not all of them are huge, but some of them, Brent, are reported as 3 times the size of a cruise ship.
Yeah. No, I know.
What's in them? What is in those things?
Maybe 300,000 alien refugees or prisoners in this case. And that's a good segue into District 9 because that's how that story begins. With a huge mothership that has arrived over Johannesburg, South Africa, and the ship just hovers there for 3 months, not making any contact, no open door, nothing. And then, of course, humans get impatient and they decide to go breach the hull and go in and see what's going on. And what do they find? They find an atrocity. They find a bunch of aliens that are starving and dying. Again, what I loved about that movie is they take the idea of an alien invasion and they throw so many twists at it just from the start of now the aliens are at our doorstep. They're not even trying to immigrate. They're dying. They're dying refugees at the mercy of humanity. Very interesting setup.
The director did a great job. I don't know if it was his first movie, but it was certainly a big one for him. Neil Blomkamp, is that how you pronounce it?
If I'm not mistaken, and someone in the comments can correct me, I think he made a short film about this idea that Peter Jackson saw, the director of Lord of the Rings, got really excited about it, promoted him, and that got him a chance to make the feature-length version of District 9.
And I also heard that they have an entire team assembled. They were going to make Halo the movie.
Yes.
And I think Blomkamp, was he directing or he was part of it? And then the thing got killed. The project died. And instead of saying everybody go home, they said, why don't we keep the teams working and let's make another movie? They didn't have a script for District 9, but they had an idea and they worked for a couple of months on it. Listen, the first time I saw that thing and the first time most people saw it, it was revelatory. And it felt way more authentic in a way than Alien Nation, because I'm not sure if we'd let 300,000 weird looking aliens integrate into Los Angeles if they showed up. But basically in South Africa, first of all, what's great about the film is, and I think it is a good reference point for what's really going on. People say, why do we always assume these things are only seen in the US? They're not. It's a global phenomenon. But this movie makes it clear. This alien craft isn't hovering over Washington, D.C. or New York City. It's hovering over Johannesburg.
Yep.
And what do they do with these aliens? They stick them in the project. What do they call it? Why am I blanking? Whatever. They send them and put them in squalor, which were along with where a number of Black people have been put in South Africa over the years. And it just feels very authentic. I guess this is why I found this to be an interesting episode, Brent. At the end of the day, I think it's very clear we are having contact right now. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't know specifically with who. I don't know that they're extraterrestrial. They might be ultra-terrestrial. They might be any number of things. And there might be one different kind or five. I tend to think there's more than one, but we're in the middle of contact. So the question is, what's it going to look like? Are we getting set up for the world's worst time? Or is life going to kind of go on and they're going to have the worst time? That's what this thing is saying. And by the way, it's townships. That's the deal. Yes. They put them in townships, and that's what they ended up doing with these creatures. By the way, do they have a name, these creatures?
That's a great question. They're nicknamed prawns. Yeah, because they have a weird shrimp quality to them. I think one of the things I appreciated about this too was the fact that this wasn't about rebellion or assimilation or whatnot in the typical sense we've seen before. It was about watching one human turn into an alien, be his body being converted into an alien.
Yeah.
And that type of body horror, it was so unique. And so the whole movie had a very satiric quality to it. Clearly it was a satire about apartheid, but they played that part of it with a lot of pathos. It was darkly comedic, like The Fly and Jeff Goldblum's transformation, but it was also sad too. He walked a fine line. It was a very enjoyable movie.
Listen, let's blast just an honorable mention for this category goes to the TV series Defiance. And what I love most about it is that it's not just one alien. There's multiple aliens, and they're all they're fighting with them. They're living together with us. And it
felt to me a little bit like Star Wars or Star Trek on Earth.
Yeah, kind of did. Loved it. But there's another show that's out right now. Right now, that got so much press last year when it debuted because it comes from the guy that gave us Breaking Bad. Vince Gilligan. Yeah.
Yeah. Pluribus is, I guess, what you would call a benevolent assimilation. It has an quality of an alien invasion, but unlike anything you've seen before. Basically, it starts off with a transmission from outer space that has these 4 repeating signals. They determine that it represents these nucleotide building blocks of RNA. That's recreated in a lab, trying to decode it. What does it mean? They end up creating something that becomes contagious, that escapes out into the world. And next thing you know, rather than aliens taking over the planet, you've got 7.2 billion humans, because a lot are lost in this process, are basically subsumed by a cheerful collective consciousness called the joined.
For what it is, though, it's a hive. It
is absolutely a hive mind. But the whole story is about the fact that this conversion happens rapidly. And then, but there's, I think, 11 or 12 people who are immune. So the whole world changes in a matter of days, maybe even a 24 hours. I don't remember, but it happens very quickly. And then left standing are these 11 people spread out across the planet who weren't converted. And because this is a benevolent alien race, they don't want to just kill those people. So they take care of them until they are joined. That's the premise of Pluribus.
Now here's the thing. As a piece of art, people are somewhat divided on it. I think Vince Gilligan is a great creator. He was on The X-Files and of course, Breaking Bad. I've seen 7 times. I just can't stop watching Breaking Bad. Great stuff. This is not Breaking Bad. This is a whole different thing. And I guess what I would say about it is I can enjoy it on an artistic level and do, but I don't for a minute think that Pluribus in any way reflects anything that might actually be about to happen or will ever happen. Whereas these other things that we've talked about today all strike me as something that there's going to be a menu of things about how contact's going to go down. These are some of the darker visions of it, but I just don't think that Pluribus, even though it is a lighter vision in some ways, it's actually dark that our humanity gets subsumed. But I just don't think that's going to happen. I don't think there's anything in ufology or anything that I've heard or read that makes me believe we're on the verge of a Pluribus situation breaking out.
Yeah, I tend to agree. In a way, I feel like the aliens of Pluribus watched the movies and the TV series that came before them and realized if we go down there and we stir things up and start a war, this could go on a long time. These humans, let's go down with a different approach. Let's go down and just tell them we're going to take care of them and go down with a peaceful, benevolent message and see what happens. And boy, did they have a much easier time of it. They got everybody but 11 or 12 humans. That I thought was interesting. I do agree, though, that the idea of joining a hive mind and being told this isn't going to be an upgrade because you don't have fear and despair and all of these negative emotions anymore, everything will be done for you and you'll be part of a joyful collective. I don't know. That feels like joining a cult to me and losing my identity and my individuality. And as you pointed out earlier, those qualities are what give us a fighting shot when an alien invasion takes over. That's what's keeping a lot of these characters alive through when they join a resistance. It's because they're not willing to roll over and assimilate and give up their own life and their beliefs and whatnot. So I feel like it's funny because Pluribus is the least horrifying in many ways, but psychologically, it is the most horrifying in my mind. Yeah,
it is. If we've seen hard conquest in the previous ones, this is soft conquest. Okay, we got to get out of here. Closing thoughts. You go first.
So I think the interesting thing to consider with everything that we've talked about, and even the things we didn't get to, is that there are always these key points in this story. And that is the aliens are going to come at some point. They're going to probably try and take over. There's going to be some number of humans who don't go along with it and may resist in different forms. And the outcome is going to be often unknown until, especially if the series doesn't get canceled. It's hard to know like how that's going to go. I think Hollywood tends to always want to tell positive stories. They want to show that humanity will survive and endure, because who wants to get the end of 10 seasons or even 2.5 hours and feel like, oh, so we lost? Great. Why is this hopeful? Why is this entertaining? I think, but we are at a time right now where this is a story that is actually unfolding in the real world. And as you said, what can we learn from any of these lessons? Is there anything to learn? Because we've seen every story told, and it's been told so many times now, it starts to make me wonder, is this all part of messaging? If some of the things that we believe to be true, that Hollywood is actually wittingly or unwittingly helping condition the populace, my question then is, okay, with everything unfolding regarding disclosure, are we in imminent danger? Is this a disclosure where there are things up in the sky and they come here and visit us? Or is this leaning more towards, oh, by the way, they've been here for a long time and they're living amongst us and they are in charge? So I want to just cut to the chase and get personal here for a moment, because I go back, as I always do, kind of my frame of reference is, what did John Harrington say to me? Yeah. John Harrington said, aliens are real, they're here, and I've seen them. The thing that I get caught up on, and I ask myself over and over again, is when I pushed him and I said, okay, are they alive? He said, I can't say. And I said, okay, you can't say or you won't say. So I can't say. And so right then I'm asking myself, it doesn't sound like they're human. It doesn't sound like potentially you can't look at whatever he's talking about and answer the question, are they like us? Are they human? Are they going to come and assimilate with us and live and die and possibly work together with our police force? Are they going to be our overlords? But if they're not, if he can't say if they're alive, then I'm starting to think we're into sentient plasmoid, as David Grush says. So I think the quality of whatever invasion might happen after first contact is going to be solely dependent upon what race of aliens are we talking about? And as some of these shows point out, is it one race? Is it multiple races? And everything in the news right now seems to be talking about multiple races.
So you do wonder about all these. Are they predictive programming in any way? Were they allowed to be created? Did they get created because they're preparing us for something? I'm not so sure. However, what I take away from your Harrington story always is that he said he cried himself to sleep every night.
Yes.
Okay. If most of these things that we talked about in the first part of this were to come true, that would cause me to cry myself to sleep if I thought that it was already happening and it was a done deal. And I know that there's a lot of conflict out there in the community, if you will, the UFO community, about threat narratives and all that. You could argue maybe these were to prepare us for that. I'm not sure about that, but it does seem to me there may be a dark side. And clearly, if it was all sweetness and light, would have been a lot more reason to tell us over the last 80 years.
I was going to say, what's the phrase in Hollywood? Good news travels fast.
Yeah. So listen, that's our show. But as we just want to say, we appreciate you watching this or listening to this, because these are a lot of work and they're fun to do. And we love sharing our ideas with you and you sharing your reactions back to us. So whether you're listening to the podcast or whether you're watching it on YouTube, you always have access to comments. We love getting your comments. We read them. We try to read all of them. We don't necessarily respond to all of them because there's only so many hours in the day, but we appreciate them. We also appreciate when you give us those thumbs up and likes and follows and subscriptions and all that good stuff. So thank you for that. Soundlight and Frequency is an iHeart podcast produced by Stellar Productions. It's executive produced by Nick Johnson, and for Stellar, Jackie Zabel. Our show's music was written by Anna Stumpf and Hamilton Lighthouser. And your hosts and executive producers are Bryce Zabel, that's me, and Brent Friedman. Watch the skies.